metal door of the visitation room buzzed open with a harsh mechanical clank that still made Mara flinch even after 3 years. She stepped through, the weight of every eye on her faded prison jumpsuit, a visible reminder of everything she'd lost. The stark fluorescent lights cast unflattering shadows across her face, accentuating the hollowness in her cheeks and the dark circles beneath her eyes. At 34, Mara Carter looked a decade older, worn down by life behind bars. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On the other side of the bulletproof glass sat her younger brother, Ethan. Clean-cut in his freshly pressed Navy uniform, his bright eyes and hopeful smile felt like they belonged to another universe, one Mara had long been exiled from. This would be their last visit before his deployment, and despite the joy of seeing him, the contrast between their lives cut deeper than any prison shank could. "They accepted me into the SEAL training program, Mara," Ethan said, his voice tinny through the old telephone receiver. "I start next month." Mara's smile was genuine, but tinged with sadness. "That's incredible, little brother. Mom and Dad would have been so proud." The mention of their parents hung in the air between them. Both gone now. Her father from cancer during her first year inside, her mother from a heart attack 6 months later. Some said it was grief that took her, but Mara knew better. It was shame. "I wish you could be there," Ethan said, his voice dropping, "for the qualification test." "Me too," Mara replied softly, her fingers absently tracing the crude tattoo on her forearm, 3 jagged lines that looked like they'd been etched with a paperclip heated over a lighter flame. Because they had been. In prison, you took your memories where you could get them, even if it meant carving them into your own skin. "I put in a request for early release to attend," she continued. "But you know how it is. 3 strikes law. Even with good behavior, I've got another 2 years minimum." What neither of them said aloud was that her 3 strikes had been nonviolent drug offenses, the result of a pain pill addiction that began after a workplace injury and spiraled when she lost her health insurance. The system didn't care about context, only consequences. "Listen, about that," Ethan leaned closer to the glass. "I've been talking to this lawyer who specializes in sentencing reform. He thinks there might be a way to—" "Don't," Mara cut him off gently. "You need to focus on your training. This is your dream, Ethan. Don't waste energy trying to fix my mistakes." The guard tapped her watch. 5 minutes left. "There's something I need to tell you," Ethan said, his voice suddenly urgent. "About the training facility. There's this commander there, Commander Reeves. I heard the instructors talking about him. He was involved in some classified operation years ago in Afghanistan." Mara's hand froze over her tattoo. The crude lines suddenly felt like they were burning into her skin. "Ethan," she said carefully, "why are you telling me this?" "Because they said his entire team would have died if it wasn't for some guardian angel sniper, someone who took impossible shots in impossible conditions." His eyes locked on to hers through the glass. "Someone with the call sign Echo 3. The world around Mara seemed to recede, the visitation room fading to background noise. She hadn't heard that designation in nearly a decade. It belonged to another lifetime, before the injury, before the addiction, before the fall. "How did you—" she began, but the final warning buzzer cut her off. "Time's up, Carter," the guard announced. Ethan pressed his palm against the glass. "I'm going to fix this," he promised. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Mara placed her hand against his, separated by inches of bulletproof barrier. "Don't do anything stupid," she warned. "You have no idea what you're messing with." As the guard led her back toward her cell block, Mara felt a familiar anxiety rising in her chest. The past she'd buried was threatening to surface, and if it did, the consequences wouldn't just affect her this time. 3 weeks later, Mara was startled awake by the harsh overhead lights in her cell clicking on at 5 a.m. "Carter," the guard's voice echoed down the corridor.
"Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Wilkinson. I've been retained to handle your case review." "By whom?" Mara asked, not taking his offered hand. Wilkinson smiled thinly. "That's confidential. But what I can tell you is that new evidence has come to light that may significantly impact your sentence." A cold feeling settled in Mara's stomach. "What kind of evidence?" "Evidence suggesting that your service record may not have been properly considered during your sentencing." He slid a folder across the table. "Particularly your classified operations history." Mara didn't touch the folder. "I don't know what you're talking about." Wilkinson's expression didn't change. "Miss Carter, we both know that's not true. Your brother contacted some influential people, people who remember Echo 3. "My brother should have kept his mouth shut," Mara hissed, leaning forward. "Do you have any idea what you're risking by bringing this up?" "I do, actually." Wilkinson opened the folder himself, revealing documents with heavy redactions. "Your identity was classified for a reason. The targets you eliminated had connections that would be very interested to learn who was responsible for removing their leadership." Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Then why are you here reopening old wounds?" Mara demanded. "Because Commander Alan Reeves personally requested a review of your case," Wilkinson replied. "And when a decorated SEAL commander with friends in high places makes requests, people listen." Mara sat back, stunned. "Reeves? I never even met him. I was 2 kilometers away when I took those shots. And yet he never forgot what you did. None of them did." Wilkinson closed the folder. "There's going to be a hearing next week. If all goes well, you could be released on parole within the month." "And then what?" Mara asked bitterly. "What am I supposed to do with freedom when my entire life is in ruins? I have no home, no job prospects, no—" "Commander Reeves has arranged for transitional housing and employment assistance, and your brother is preparing to welcome you home." Mara fell silent, overwhelmed by the sudden possibility of a future she'd stopped allowing herself to imagine. "There's one condition," Wilkinson added. "Commander Reeves wants to meet you. In person." "Why?" "He says he owes you a debt. And Alan Reeves is a man who pays his debts." 7 days later, Mara stood outside the prison gates, wearing donated civilian clothes that hung loose on her frame. 3 years of prison food had left her thin, almost gaunt. The cheap cotton shirt felt strange against her skin after so long in a jumpsuit. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The rear door opened, and a man in his 50s stepped out. His posture was military straight, his salt and pepper hair cropped short. When he saw Mara, his eyes widened slightly. "Echo 3, he said simply, extending his hand. "I'm Commander Reeves." Mara hesitated before shaking his hand. "I don't go by that anymore." "I understand." He gestured to the SUV. "We have a lot to discuss. Would you join me?" As they drove, Reeves explained what had happened. Ethan, determined to help his sister, had managed to get himself assigned to Reeves's training unit. During a late-night training exercise, he'd approached the commander privately and told him his sister's story. "At first, I thought he was delusional. Echo 3 was a ghost, a sniper who appeared out of nowhere during one of the worst firefights of my career, took impossible shots in a thunderstorm, then disappeared just as mysteriously. We were never even told if Echo 3 was a man or a woman." "That was the point," Mara said quietly. "I was part of a pilot program. Women weren't officially allowed in combat roles then. And after you saved my team, instead of recognition, I got discarded." Mara finished for him. "Workplace injury during training led to surgery, surgery led to painkillers led to addiction. When my tour ended, so did my military health care. The rest you can probably guess." Reeves's jaw tightened. "The system failed you." "The system is very good at what it does," Mara corrected him. "It protects those with power and discards those without. I've had a lot of time to think about it. Well, I'm trying to correct at least one failure." Reeves handed her a folder. "Your brother graduates from his initial SEAL qualification training tomorrow. He's requested that you be allowed to attend." Mara stared at the folder. "Is that wise? I'm a convicted felon." "You're also the person who saved my life and the lives of 5 other men," Reeves replied firmly. "Men who now have families and futures because of what you did that night.
If anyone objects to your presence, they can take it up with me personally." The next morning, Mara stood at the edge of the naval training facility, feeling conspicuously out of place. Her prison tattoo was partially visible beneath her short-sleeved shirt. She hadn't thought to bring anything to cover it. Around her, military personnel and families of other trainees gave her a wide berth, their sideways glances making it clear they sensed she didn't belong. Ethan was stationed at the far end of the training field, preparing for his marksmanship qualification test. Even from a distance, Mara could see his hands trembling as he assembled the Barrett sniper rifle. The instructors were showing visible impatience. "Pathetic," muttered a young trainee standing near Mara. "Guy's got the shakes so bad he can't even set up his weapon." His companion snickered. "Wonder who the ex-con is here to see. Bet she's somebody's embarrassment of a mother." Mara kept her eyes forward, ignoring their comments. She'd learned in prison that responding only escalated things. But inside, her protective instincts flared. Ethan had always struggled with anxiety under observation, a trait that had made school presentations a nightmare and now threatened his military career. "Ma'am," a stern voice interrupted her thoughts. "This area is for family members of qualified personnel only." Mara turned to face a lieutenant with a name tag reading Daniels. His expression made it clear he'd already decided she didn't belong. "I'm Ethan Carter's sister," she replied calmly. "I'm here to watch his qualification test." Lieutenant Daniels looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her prison tattoo. "Do you have a visitor's pass?" "Commander Reeves arranged for me to be here." "Commander Reeves," Daniels repeated skeptically. "And I'm supposed to just take your word for that. You could call and verify, or you could save everyone the trouble and wait in the parking lot." His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. In the distance, Mara saw Ethan drop the rifle bipod for the second time. The instructor barked something at him, and his shoulders hunched forward in embarrassment. His eyes darted toward where Mara stood, searching for reassurance. "I'm not leaving," Mara said quietly. "My brother needs me here." Lieutenant Daniels' expression hardened. "Ma'am, this is a military installation, not a social gathering. Your presence is disrupting training operations." "I'm standing quietly behind the designated barrier," Mara pointed out. "How exactly am I disrupting anything?" "That tattoo, for starters," Daniels replied with disgust. "This is a place of honor and discipline, not a place for displaying prison ink and criminal history." The nearby trainees were openly watching now, some smirking at her public dressing down. Mara felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, the anger she'd spent years learning to control. "Your trainee keeps looking over here instead of focusing on his weapon. So unless you want to be responsible for his failure, I suggest you remove yourself from his line of sight." Mara stood her ground, eyes never leaving his. "With all due respect, Lieutenant, I've earned the right to stand on this soil as much as anyone here." Daniels laughed coldly. "Earned? With what? Time served? This isn't a halfway house, lady. It's one of the most elite training facilities in the world." On the field, Ethan had dropped the bipod a third time. The other trainees around him were beginning to notice, and Mara could see the humiliation spreading across his face. "Ma'am," Daniel's voice hardened, "I'm going to have to insist that you leave the premises immediately, or I'll be forced to call security." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Mara was acutely aware of how she appeared to them, an ex-con with a crude prison tattoo, trying to push her way into a place she clearly didn't belong. "I'm not leaving," she repeated, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil inside. "Not until my brother completes his test." "Then you'll be leaving in handcuffs," Daniel snapped, reaching for his radio. "Security to the family observation area. We have an unauthorized civilian refusing to comply with orders." Something in Mara shifted then. A subtle change in her posture, a realignment of her weight distribution that would have been imperceptible to most observers. But it wasn't lost on one of the older instructors who'd been watching the exchange with growing interest.
"Wait," the instructor said, approaching them. His name tag identified him as Sergeant Jackson. "Ma'am, that tattoo on your arm, what does it mean?" Mara hesitated, her fingers unconsciously moving to cover the crude lines. "It's just prison ink," Daniels dismissed. "Probably some gang affiliation." "No," Jackson said slowly. "I don't think it is." He looked directly at Mara. "Those 3 lines, they're waves, aren't they? Ocean waves." The crowd had fallen silent, sensing that something significant was happening. "Lieutenant," Jackson said, his voice suddenly formal, "I think we should verify this woman's identity before taking any action." "She's already admitted she's Carter's sister," Daniels replied impatiently, "and she's disrupting my training exercise." "I don't think she is," came a new voice. Commander Reeves had appeared at the edge of the gathering, his presence immediately commanding attention. "In fact, I think she might be the most qualified person here to observe a sniper qualification test." Daniels snapped to attention. "Sir, I was just explaining to this civilian that—" "Her name is Mara Carter," Reeves interrupted, "and until you know who you're speaking to, Lieutenant, I suggest you moderate your tone." The atmosphere shifted palpably. Mara could feel the confusion rippling through the crowd, the uncertainty about who exactly this ex-con with the prison tattoo might be to warrant such treatment from a respected commander. "Ms. Carter," Reeves said, turning to her, "would you mind showing Sergeant Jackson your tattoo? The full tattoo." Mara looked at him questioningly. "Trust me," Reeves said quietly. Slowly, Mara rolled up her sleeve further, revealing that the 3 crude, wavy lines extended to form a pattern around a small, faded E3 that had been partially obscured. Sergeant Jackson's eyes widened. "Echo 3, he whispered. "It's you. You're real." Lieutenant Daniels looked between them in confusion. "I don't understand. What's Echo 3? "Not what, who. Echo 3 was the call sign for a sniper who saved my life and the lives of 5 other men during a classified operation in Afghanistan. A sniper who made shots that, according to our ballistics experts, should have been impossible given the weather conditions and visibility." "Sir," Daniels said, skeptically, "are you suggesting that this woman—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Lieutenant. I'm telling you that the person you just threatened to have arrested is a decorated veteran whose actions are still classified at the highest levels." The silence on the training field was absolute. Every eye was locked on Mara, the woman they dismissed moments ago as just another ex-con with the prison tattoo. Lieutenant Daniels stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first glimmers of horrified realization. "Sir, I had no idea." "Clearly," Commander Reeves cut him off. "And that's precisely the point, Lieutenant. You judged Miss Carter based on appearances rather than treating her with the basic respect due to any civilian visitor, let alone a veteran." Mara shifted uncomfortably under the sudden scrutiny. The weight of dozens of eyes felt heavier than any prison yard stare-down she'd endured. "Commander," she said quietly, "this isn't necessary. I just want to watch my brother complete his test." But Reeves wasn't finished. He turned to address the assembled trainees and instructors. "The woman you see before you made 7 consecutive kill shots in a thunderstorm with 60-mile-per-hour crosswinds and near zero visibility. Shots that our best marksmen said were theoretically impossible given the weather conditions and visibility. She did it not for recognition or medals, but because 6 men, myself included, would have died without her intervention." On the far side of the field, Ethan had stopped his qualification preparations entirely. His face reflected a mixture of pride and concern as he watched his sister becoming the center of attention, exactly what she'd always tried to avoid. "Sir," Sergeant Jackson spoke up, "if Echo 3 is here, why is she—" He trailed off, eyeing the prison tattoo. "Because systems fail people," Reeves answered bluntly.
even people who've served their country with extraordinary courage. He looked directly at Lieutenant Daniels, and because people in positions of authority too often abuse that authority when dealing with those they consider beneath them. Daniels' face flushed red with humiliation. "Commander, I apologize for the misunderstanding. If I'd known—" "That's just it, Lieutenant," Mara interrupted, finding her voice. "You shouldn't need to know someone's service record to treat them with basic dignity." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the assembled personnel. "Ms. Carter is here as my personal guest to observe her brother's qualification test. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." He glanced around, but no one dared object.
Now, I believe we have training to resume. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan caught Mara's eye across the field. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. His hands had stopped shaking. "I didn't ask for this," Mara said quietly to Reeves. "I didn't want to be exposed." "I know," he replied, "but sometimes the truth needs to come out, not just for others, but for ourselves." He nodded toward Ethan. "Your brother needs to see who you really are. And maybe you need to remember it too." Mara watched as Ethan returned to his qualification station with renewed focus. His movements were fluid now, confident. The Barrett rifle no longer looked unwieldy in his hands. "They'll have questions," she said, still watching her brother. "About what happened, about where I've been, about this." She touched her prison tattoo. "Let them ask," Reeves responded. "You don't owe anyone answers, but your story deserves to be heard, not hidden." The training resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Where before there had been dismissal and derision directed at Mara, now there were curious glances and whispered conversations. The trainees who had mocked her earlier now couldn't look her in the eye. Ethan completed his first qualification round with perfect accuracy. Each shot found its mark with precision that drew appreciative nods from the instructors. When he finished, he looked over at Mara with a grin that transported her back to when they were kids, before everything had gone wrong. During the brief break between qualification rounds, Sergeant Jackson approached Mara hesitantly. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind me asking, but were you really there? At Operation Crosswind?" Mara studied him. "You were part of the support team." Jackson nodded. "Communications specialist. I was monitoring radio traffic when Commander Reeves's team got pinned down. We lost contact for nearly 6 hours." He paused. "The official report never mentioned a sniper intervention." "The official report is incomplete," Mara said simply. "But how did you—" Jackson lowered his voice. "The storm that day was biblical. Our satellite imagery was completely obscured. We couldn't even get coordinates to the extraction team." Mara looked out across the training field, remembering. "I had memorized the terrain maps, spent weeks studying elevation charts, wind patterns, potential ingress and egress routes." She closed her eyes briefly. "When the storm hit and communications went down, I calculated the most likely ambush points based on known enemy patrol patterns." "That's—" Jackson shook his head in amazement. "That's not standard protocol." "No," Mara agreed. It wasn't. Lieutenant Daniels had been hovering nearby, clearly wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he stepped forward. "Miss Carter," he said stiffly, "I owe you a sincere apology. My behavior was unprofessional and disrespectful." Mara regarded him coolly. "I'm not the one you should be apologizing to, Lieutenant. My brother and every other trainee watching you abuse your authority deserve that apology more than I do." Daniels flinched as if he'd been slapped. "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated. "If there's anything I can do—" "You can start by being a better leader," Mara cut him off. "Power isn't about making others feel small. It's about lifting them up when they're struggling." As Daniels walked away, thoroughly chastened, a female trainee cautiously approached. Her name tag read Rodriguez. "Ma'am,
I just wanted to say, you're the reason I'm here. Mara looked at her in confusion. I don't understand. My father was Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez. He was part of Commander Reeves's team that day. He used to tell me bedtime stories about the guardian angel who saved him. I always thought he was making it up, a superhero story to help me sleep. I never knew you were real. Mara felt her throat tighten. Your father? Is he? He's alive and well, Rodriguez smiled. Got 3 kids now. I'm the oldest. Joined up because of his stories about that day. I didn't know, Mara whispered, overwhelmed by the realization that her actions had created ripples she'd never imagined. I never knew what happened to any of them after. You should, Commander Reeves said, rejoining them. Every man on my team has a family now, children who wouldn't exist if not for what you did. He glanced at Rodriguez, some of whom are following in their father's footsteps. The second qualification round was beginning. Ethan took his position with a confidence that hadn't been there before. His first shot hit dead center. He's good, Reeves observed.
He always was, Mara replied. Just needed to believe it. As they watched Ethan work through his qualification course, Sergeant Jackson returned with an older man in civilian clothes. Miss Carter, this is James Wilkins from the Veterans Affairs Office. He'd like to speak with you. Wilkins extended his hand. Miss Carter, I've been briefed on your situation. I'd like to discuss reinstatement of your veterans' benefits and exploring a medical discharge reclassification. Mara stared at him. What? Commander Reeves has filed a formal review request, Wilkins explained. Based on the information he's provided about your service and subsequent injury, there's strong evidence that your discharge should have been medical rather than general. That was years ago, Mara said, stunned. I've been convicted of felonies since then. Which may never have happened if you'd received proper treatment and support, Wilkins countered. The system failed you, Miss Carter. We're trying to correct that failure. Mara felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. After years of everything going wrong, things were suddenly moving in directions she couldn't have imagined. There's more, Reeves added. I've spoken with the district attorney who prosecuted your case. In light of new information about your service record and medical history, they're open to reviewing your sentence. Why are you doing this? Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I owe you my life, Reeves answered simply. And because what happened to you was wrong. The final qualification round ended with Ethan achieving the highest score in his group. As the trainees were dismissed, he jogged over to where Mara stood. Did you see that? He asked, grinning. Perfect score on the final round. I saw, Mara smiled, genuine pride flooding through her. You were amazing. Ethan's expression grew serious. What's happening, Mara? Everyone's treating you differently. There are instructors over there who won't even look at me now, like they're embarrassed or something. Mara glanced at Reeves, who nodded encouragingly. It's time I told you the truth, she said quietly. About what I did, about what happened after. All of it. They found a quiet corner of the base's cafeteria, now empty between meal services. Ethan sat across from his sister, his eyes never leaving her face as she began to tell her story. I was recruited for a special program. Women weren't officially allowed in combat roles then, but they needed snipers, and I had skills they wanted. You never told me you were a sniper. You told me you were a supply specialist. That was my official designation, Mara nodded. But I was deployed with Special Forces units as Overwatch. Everything was classified, off the books. She traced the crude prison tattoo on her arm. This wasn't my first ink. I had the real insignia once, the official Echo 3 designation. Had to have it removed when I was discharged. Why? Ethan asked. If you were as good as Commander Reeves says. Because I was a liability, Mara said flatly. After Afghanistan, I was injured during a training exercise back stateside. Spinal compression fracture.
They put me on high-dose painkillers for months. By the time my tour ended, I was dependent. Ethan's face fell. And they just cut you loose? My official record never showed my real assignments. So when I was discharged, I wasn't eligible for specialized veterans services, just standard medical care, which ended with my service. She looked down at her hands. The pain didn't end, though. Neither did the nightmares. So you kept taking the pills. Until I couldn't get them legally anymore, Mara confirmed. Then I found other ways, other suppliers. You know the rest. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. You were 17 when I was discharged, Mara reminded him gently. Still in high school. It wasn't your burden to carry. But all these years I thought... Ethan struggled with the words. I thought you'd just made bad choices, that you'd thrown everything away for drugs. I did make bad choices, Mara said firmly. The circumstances were complicated, but the choices were still mine. I'm not running from that responsibility. But if people had known what you'd done, what you were going through... It wouldn't have made a difference, Mara interrupted. Not in the system I was caught in. She reached across the table to take his hand. But that's not the point of the story, Ethan. I didn't tell you so you'd feel sorry for me. Then why tell me now? Because I want you to understand something important. What happened to me doesn't define me.
Not the good parts, not the bad parts. The medals I never received don't make me a hero, and the prison time I served doesn't make me a villain. Ethan nodded slowly. So what does define you? The choices I make now, Mara answered. Every day. And I want you to remember that when things get tough in your training, in your career. Your worst moment doesn't define you unless you let it. They were interrupted by Commander Reeves approaching their table. Sorry to intrude, he said, but there's someone here who'd like to meet Mrs. Carter. Behind him stood a tall, distinguished-looking woman in the uniform of a Navy admiral. Her presence immediately commanded attention, and Ethan jumped to his feet to stand at attention. At ease, trainee, the admiral said with a small smile, before turning her attention to Mara. Mrs. Carter. I'm Admiral Patricia Hayes. Mara rose slowly, recognition dawning on her face. You were the mission commander for Operation Crosswind. I was, Hayes confirmed, though I never knew the identity of Echo 3 until today. The program was compartmentalized, even from me. Admiral Hayes has been instrumental in expediting your case review, Reeves explained. Hayes nodded. When Commander Reeves contacted me with your story, I had my staff pull every record we could find. What happened to you was a catastrophic system failure, Mrs. Carter, one that I intend to rectify. It's a little late for that, Mara said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Yes, it is, Hayes agreed, surprising her, which is why an apology isn't enough. I've authorized immediate reinstatement of your full veterans benefits, with back pay to the date of your discharge. I've also recommended a medical reclassification of your discharge status and expungement of your criminal record under the Veterans Treatment Court program. Mara stared at her in disbelief. You can do that? I can make sure the right people review your case with all the information they should have had the first time. The rest will take time, but I'm confident in the outcome. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Mara asked. Hayes and Reeves exchanged a look. That's actually why I'm here, the Admiral said. I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? We're establishing a new training program for advanced marksmanship instructors, Hayes explained. We need someone with exceptional skills and real-world experience to help develop the curriculum. Mara shook her head. I haven't fired a weapon in years, and I'm still on parole. Which is why this would be a consulting position initially. Once your legal situation is resolved, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement if you're interested. You want me to teach? Mara couldn't hide her skepticism. I want you to help us prevent others from facing what you faced, both in combat and after. Mara looked at Ethan, who was watching her with quiet hope in his eyes. Then at Reeves, whose life she'd saved without ever having met him until today. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Hayes nodded. In the meantime, there's a graduation ceremony tomorrow for this training cohort. I understand your brother will be receiving recognition for his marksmanship qualification scores. She smiled. I'd be honored if you'd attend as my guest. After the Admiral and Commander Reeves left, Ethan turned to his sister with a mixture of awe and concern. What are you going to do? He asked. Mara looked around the cafeteria at the naval base that represented everything she'd lost and might now represent a future she'd never imagined possible. I don't know yet, she admitted, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I might have choices again. The next morning, Mara stood at the back of the assembly hall watching as Ethan and his fellow trainees received their qualification certificates. She'd borrowed clothes for the ceremony, simple black pants and a blue blouse that made her look more put together than she'd felt in years. She'd covered her prison tattoo with a long-sleeve jacket despite the warm weather. Not out of shame, but because today wasn't about her past. It was about Ethan's future. Admiral Hayes approached to stand beside her. He has your steadiness, she observed, watching Ethan, and your focus. He has his own gifts. I just helped him see them.
Before he reached them, however, Lieutenant Daniels intercepted him. Mara tensed, ready to intervene, but Hayes placed a restraining hand on her arm. Watch, the Admiral said quietly. To Mara's astonishment, Lieutenant Daniels offered Ethan a crisp salute. Trainee Carter, he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I owe you an apology for my conduct yesterday. My treatment of your sister was unprofessional and beneath the standards we expect in this program. I hope you can accept my sincere regret. Ethan returned the salute. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your candor. As Daniels walked away, Ethan continued toward Mara and the Admiral, a smile breaking across his face. Did you see that? He asked. I did, Mara nodded. Looks like Lieutenant Daniels might be learning something about leadership after all. Miss Carter, Admiral Hayes said, I should inform you that I've received confirmation from the Veterans Affairs Office. Your benefits reinstatement has been approved, effective immediately. You'll be receiving your first back pay installment within the week. Mara felt momentarily dizzy at the news. After years of struggling to survive, of county jail cells and prison bunks, of dead-end jobs that wouldn't hire felons, and apartment applications that were rejected because of her record, the idea of financial stability was almost too much to comprehend. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me, Hayes replied. It's what should have happened years ago. As they left the ceremony, stepping out into the bright California sunshine, Ethan put his arm around his sister's shoulders. So what now? He asked. Will you take the consulting job? Mara looked across the training facility, at the sniper range where trainees were already setting up for another qualification round. She thought about all the young men and women who would face combat deployments in the years ahead, who would need the skills she'd once possessed. Maybe, she said, but first, I think I need to find out if I can still shoot. Ethan grinned. I might know someone who could give you some range time. As they walked toward the parking lot, a group of instructors passed by. This time, instead of suspicious glances and whispered judgments, Mara received something she hadn't experienced in years, respectful nods of acknowledgement. Not because they knew she was Echo 3, but because they'd learned not to judge someone based on appearances alone. The prison tattoo on her arm would always remain, a reminder of where she'd been, what she'd endured. But perhaps now it could become something else too, a symbol of resilience, of survival against impossible odds, just like those impossible shots she'd once made in a thunderstorm to save 6 men she'd never met. There's something else you should know, Ethan said as they reached the car. The guys from Commander Reeves' team, the ones you saved, they're having a reunion next month, all of them, with their families. He paused. They want to meet you. Mara stopped, emotions welling up that she'd kept carefully buried for years. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You don't have to be ready today, Ethan reminded her, echoing her own words from yesterday. Just think about it. As they drove away from the base, Mara caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. Behind the weariness and the hard edges prison had given her, she could see traces of the woman she'd once been, the sniper with the steadiest hands in the unit, the sister who'd raised her brother after their parents died, the fighter who'd never given up even when the entire system had failed her. Maybe it was time to find out who she could still become.
Remember, Reeves continued, this isn't a test. It's just to help you reconnect with the fundamentals. But it felt like a test to Mara. Not of her skills, but of her identity. Who was she now? The decorated sniper who had saved lives with impossible shots? The convicted felon with a prison tattoo? Or someone entirely new, forging an identity from the fragments of her past? She aligned her sight picture, slowed her breathing, and gently squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. The rifle's powerful recoil felt like coming home. Bullseye, Reeves announced, peering through the spotting scope. Dead center. Mara allowed herself a small smile. Lucky shot. Try again, Reeves challenged. She fired 5 more rounds in quick succession, all hit within the center circle. That's not luck, Reeves said quietly. That's who you are. No matter what's happened since, that part of you didn't disappear. Mara lowered the rifle, emotions swirling beneath her carefully controlled exterior. I'm not sure if that's comforting or terrifying. Maybe it's both, Reeves acknowledged, but it's also an opportunity. Later that afternoon, Mara sat in Admiral Hayes's office discussing the proposed consulting position. The spacious room, with its polished desk and wall of service photographs, made Mara acutely aware of how far she'd fallen and how unexpected this potential second chance was. The program would focus on advanced marksmanship techniques for special operations personnel, Hayes explained, sliding a folder across the desk. But equally important would be integration of mental health support, pain management protocols, and transition preparation for operators returning to civilian life. Mara scanned the proposal, her heart quickening. You want to prevent what happened to me? Precisely, Hayes nodded. Your experience, both as an elite operator and as someone the system failed, gives you a unique perspective that could help reshape how we support our people. I'm still on parole, Mara reminded her. I can't even vote, let alone hold security clearance. Which is why we're starting with a civilian consultant role, Hayes explained. Limited clearance, focusing on training curriculum development while your legal situation is being resolved. Mara closed the folder. What about the other instructors, the trainees? Not everyone will welcome an ex-con teaching elite forces, regardless of my past service. You've already changed minds, Hayes pointed out. Lieutenant Daniels has become one of your strongest advocates since the incident at the training field. One person, Mara countered, out of thousands in the chain of command. Hayes leaned forward. Ms. Carter, when you were positioned on that ridge in Afghanistan, facing impossible weather conditions and 7 high-value targets threatening Commander Reeves's team, did you hesitate because the odds were against you? Mara fell silent. This is no different, Hayes continued. Another impossible situation where lives are at stake. Different battlefield, same principle. It's not the same, Mara argued. In Afghanistan, I had nothing to lose. Now, she trailed off, the implication clear. Now she had hope, and hope made you vulnerable. Think about it, Hayes said, recognizing Mara's need for space. The position will remain open. In the meantime, I understand you'll be attending the reunion with Commander Reeves's team this weekend. Mara nodded, anxiety fluttering in her stomach at the thought. Ethan thinks it's important. It is, Hayes agreed, for them and for you. As Mara left the office, she found Lieutenant Daniels waiting in the corridor. Miss Carter, he said, standing straighter. Do you have a moment? Mara regarded him warily. Despite his apology at Ethan's graduation, she remained cautious around authority figures. Prison had reinforced the lesson that people with power couldn't be trusted. What can I do for you, Lieutenant? I wanted to share something, Daniel said, uncharacteristically hesitant. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, handing it to Mara. It showed a young soldier in desert camouflage, arm in arm with an older man in a Marine Corps uniform. That's me with my father, Daniels explained. He was a Force Recon Marine. 2 tours in Afghanistan before an IED took his legs. He paused. He came home different, not just physically. The pain medication, the PTSD,
He was like a stranger wearing my dad's face. Mara looked at him with new understanding. I'm sorry. He overdosed when I was 19, Daniels continued. The official report called it accidental, but we all knew. He reclaimed the photo, tucking it carefully away.
I joined up thinking I'd honor his memory. Ended up carrying a chip on my shoulder against anyone I thought was taking the easy way out. Like drug addicts with prison tattoos, Mara observed. Daniels nodded, shame evident in his expression. When Commander Reeves explained who you were, what you'd been through, it was like seeing my father's story from the other side. He met her gaze directly. I wanted you to know why I reacted the way I did, not as an excuse, but as context. Mara studied him, seeing beyond the rigid lieutenant to the wounded son beneath. Thank you for telling me. There's one more thing, Daniels added. The marksmanship program Admiral Hayes is developing, I've requested assignment to the project. If you decide to take the consulting position, we'd be working together. And that doesn't bother you? Mara challenged, taking direction from someone with my background. It would have a month ago, Daniels admitted honestly. Now, I'd consider it an honor. As he walked away, Mara felt something shift inside her. Her identity had been shattered when she'd left the military, fragmented further with each arrest, each conviction, each prison sentence. But perhaps those fragments weren't lost forever. Perhaps they could be reassembled into something new, something stronger for having been broken. The reunion with Commander Reeves' team was held at a private beachfront property north of San Diego. As Ethan drove them along the coastal highway, Mara sat silently, watching the Pacific Ocean glittering in the afternoon sun. Her anxiety had been building all day, a familiar tightness in her chest that prison had taught her to disguise. You okay? Ethan asked, glancing away from the road. Fine, Mara replied automatically. Liar, Ethan smiled. It's okay to be nervous, you know. Mara sighed. I'm not nervous. I'm terrified. Of what? These guys worship you. You're basically their guardian angel. That's the problem, Mara explained. They've built me into some kind of legend. What happens when they meet the reality? An ex-con with a crude prison tattoo and a spotty employment history. Ethan shook his head. You still don't get it, do you? What you did for them transcends everything else. The fact that you suffered afterward, that the system failed you, that doesn't diminish your actions. If anything, it makes them more remarkable. As they pulled into the driveway, Mara could see a gathering on the back deck overlooking the ocean. 6 men of varying ages, surrounded by women and children. Commander Reeves spotted their car and waved them over. Deep breath, Ethan murmured as they approached. Remember, these are good people. The gathering fell silent as Mara stepped onto the deck. 6 pairs of eyes that belonged to men she had saved but never met, focused on her with an intensity that made her want to retreat. Team, Commander Reeves said formally, I'd like to introduce Mara Carter, call sign Echo 3. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the men, a tall, shouldered figure with salt and pepper hair, stepped forward. Miguel Rodriguez, he said, extending his hand. Staff Sergeant, retired. Mara recognized him as the father of the female trainee she'd met at the base. Your daughter is following in your footsteps, she said, shaking his hand. Because of you, Rodriguez replied simply. Because you gave me the chance to have a family. One by one, the others stepped forward to introduce themselves. Thomas Wilson, who now taught high school history. James Chen, who had become a trauma surgeon. Marcus Williams, who ran a security consulting firm. David Sanchez, who coached youth basketball. And finally, Michael Peterson, the youngest of the group, who still served as a SEAL instructor. I don't know what to say, Mara admitted after the introductions. I was just doing my job. Your job, Peterson said, was to maintain your assigned position and provide overwatch for the extraction route, not to relocate during a thunderstorm on your own initiative to save 6 men you'd never met. Mara flushed. The extraction route was compromised. I had to adapt.
You had to make 7 consecutive kill shots in weather conditions that our ballistics experts later said made accuracy beyond 200 yards statistically impossible. And you did it at over 700 yards. I had good equipment, Mara deflected. Rodriguez laughed. Always the humble one. Echo 3 was a ghost story in our unit, the sniper who could do the impossible. Some of the guys didn't even believe you existed. A petite woman approached, carrying a toddler on her hip. I'm Lisa Rodriguez, Miguel's wife. This is our youngest, Mara. Mara stared at the child in disbelief.
You named your daughter after me? But you didn't even know who I was. We knew what mattered, Lisa replied simply. That someone risked everything to bring my husband home. As the afternoon progressed, Mara found herself surrounded by the families of the men she'd saved. Children who wouldn't exist if she hadn't been on that ridge. Spouses who wouldn't have had their partners. Lives that branched outward from that single moment of decision to leave her assigned position and attempt the impossible. During a quiet moment, she found herself standing at the deck railing with Rodriguez, watching the waves crash against the shore. When did you start using? He asked quietly. Mara tensed. How did you? I recognized the signs. Rodriguez interrupted gently. The way you hold yourself. The wariness. The way you keep checking exit routes. I've been there. You? He nodded. OxyContin after my second tour. Shrapnel in my back. Doctors handed out pills like candy back then. He glanced at her. Took me 3 years and 2 relapses to get clean. What changed? Mara asked. Lisa got pregnant with our first. Made me realize I was choosing the pills over my future, over everything that mattered. He paused. But I had support. VA programs, family, the team. From what I hear, you faced it alone. I made my choices, Mara said. The familiar response feeling hollow even to her own ears. Sure you did, Rodriguez agreed easily. Same as I did. Difference is I got second chances. Sounds like you're finally getting yours. Before Mara could respond, a commotion from inside the house drew their attention. Admiral Hayes had arrived, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit whom Mara recognized as the attorney who had visited her in prison. Miss Carter, Hayes called, waving her over. We have news. The gathering clustered around as Hayes explained. The Veterans Treatment Court has reviewed your case. In light of your service record and medical history, they've approved a comprehensive sentence reconsideration. What does that mean? Ethan asked, standing protectively beside his sister. The attorney, Wilkinson, stepped forward. It means that Miss Carter's remaining parole terms have been vacated. Her felony convictions will be expunged upon completion of a veterans treatment program, which will substitute for the remainder of her sentence. The world seemed to tilt beneath Mara's feet. Expunged? She repeated numbly. Your record will be clear, Wilkinson confirmed, as if the convictions never happened. And there's more, Hayes added, reaching into a folder. She withdrew a small box and handed it to Commander Reeves. Reeves opened it, revealing a Navy Cross, one of the highest decorations awarded for valor in combat. This was approved by a special review board, Reeves explained, for actions above and beyond the call of duty during Operation Crosswind. I can't accept that, Mara protested. My role was classified, off the books. Not anymore, Hayes replied. Your service record has been updated to reflect your actual role and contributions, including the lives you saved that day. Reeves held out the medal. This belongs to you, Echo 3, not just for what you did then, but for everything you endured after. With trembling fingers, Mara accepted the box. The weight of it felt impossible, heavier than the rifle she'd carried, heavier than the burden of her past mistakes. I don't know how to process all this. A month ago I was in prison. Now you have choices, Rodriguez said, stepping forward. Same as you gave us that day. As the celebration continued around her, Mara found herself drawn back to the deck railing, needing a moment alone with her thoughts. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the water with streaks of gold and crimson. Ethan joined her, leaning against the rail. Quite a day.
quite a month.
"So what happens now?" he asked. "Will you take the position with Admiral Hayes's program?" Mara looked down at the metal in her hand, then out at the vastness of the ocean. "I think I need to." "Because you feel obligated?" "Because I finally understand what Commander Reeves meant," Mara explained. "About my experience being valuable precisely because of its brokenness. I've seen both sides, the hero and the fallen. Maybe that perspective can help others navigate the path between." "The prison tattoo becomes a badge of honor," Ethan mused. Mara touched the crude ink on her arm. "Not honor exactly. Experience. Wisdom earned the hard way." Inside the house, someone called for a toast. Ethan gestured toward the gathering. "Come on, they're waiting for the guest of honor." As they rejoined the group, Mara found herself surrounded by the tangible results of that one decision she'd made years ago. The families, the careers, the lives that had flourished because 6 men had come home when they should have died. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of that impact, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. Commander Reeves raised his glass. "To Echo 3, he began, "the guardian angel who brought us home." "To Mara Carter," Rodriguez amended, "who reminds us that heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about doing the right thing even when it costs you everything." As glasses clinked around her, Mara felt something she hadn't experienced in years: belonging. Not because these people ignored her past, but because they embraced it, all of it, as part of who she was. The prison tattoo that had once marked her as an outcast now told a story of resilience, of falling and rising again, of impossible shots taken not once, but twice, first on a ridge in Afghanistan, and now in rebuilding a life that had been shattered. Some wounds never fully healed. Some scars remained visible for a lifetime. But perhaps, Mara realized, that was the point. The broken places became the sources of our greatest strength if we had the courage to reclaim them. 6 months after the reunion at the beach house, Mara Carter stood at the edge of the Advanced Tactical Training Facility's newest shooting range. The sprawling complex, still under construction in some areas, represented the physical manifestation of Admiral Hayes's vision, a comprehensive training center designed to prepare special operations personnel not just for combat, but for life after service. The morning sun glinted off the gleaming metal of new target systems as Mara surveyed what they'd built. Behind her, a group of 20 trainees waited in formation, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. This would be her first official class as lead instructor for the Advanced Marksmanship and Resilience Training Program. "Nervous?" Lieutenant Daniels asked, joining her at the edge of the range. In the months they worked together, developing the curriculum, an unexpected friendship had formed between them, forged from shared grief and common purpose. "Terrified," Mara admitted with a half-smile. "What if they take one look at me and decide I'm a fraud?" Daniels glanced at her left forearm, where the crude prison tattoo remained visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve. She'd been offered removal services as part of her rehabilitation program, but had declined. The jagged lines had become part of her story, one she no longer felt compelled to hide. Then they'll learn something important on their first day, that heroes don't look like the ones in movies. Mara took a deep breath and turned to face the waiting trainees. They represented the elite of various special operations programs, experienced operators who had been handpicked for advanced training. Many had combat experience. All had preconceptions about what an instructor at this level should look like. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying across the range with unexpected authority. "My name is Mara Carter. Some of you may know me as Echo 3. Others might recognize me as the woman with the prison tattoo who caused a stir at the qualification range 6 months ago." A few of the trainees exchanged glances. "Both identities are accurate, and both are relevant to what you'll learn here." She paced slowly in front of the formation, studying their faces. "This program is called Advanced Marksmanship and Resilience Training. The marksmanship part is straightforward. We'll push your skills beyond what you thought possible. The resilience part, that's where my prison tattoo becomes as important as my service record." One of the trainees, a young woman with sergeant's stripes, raised her hand,
Ma'am, permission to speak freely? Always, Mara nodded. Some of us have heard rumors about your record. 7 kill shots during a thunderstorm over impossible distances. Is that real or just a story they tell to motivate us? Mara considered the question. The shots were real, she confirmed. The conditions were real. But the legend that grew around them, that's something else entirely. She gestured toward the complex shooting course behind her. Today isn't about my legend. It's about each of you finding your own limits and then pushing beyond them. For the next 4 hours, Mara put the trainees through a series of increasingly challenging exercises. She didn't just demonstrate techniques, she explained the physics behind them, the psychological factors that affected accuracy under stress, the subtle adjustments that could make impossible shots possible. By midday, even the most skeptical trainees were watching her with undisguised respect. It wasn't just her accuracy that impressed them, it was her ability to diagnose their individual challenges, to customize guidance for each operator's unique tendencies. During the lunch break, Mara retreated to the small office she shared with Daniels. The walls were still mostly bare, save for a single framed photograph. The team from Operation Crosswind with their families at the beach house reunion. "How's it going?" Ethan asked, poking his head through the doorway. Having completed his initial SEAL training, he was now part of a specialized unit, one that occasionally trained at the facility. "Better than I expected," Mara admitted, sinking into her chair. "They're good, eager to learn." "And you're good at teaching," Ethan pointed out. "Better than good." A knock at the door interrupted them. Admiral Hayes entered, followed by a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit whom Mara didn't recognize. "Ms. Carter," Hayes said formally, "I hope we're not interrupting. I wanted to introduce William Forrester, the new Secretary of Veterans Affairs." Mara rose quickly, suddenly aware of her casual training attire and visible prison tattoo. "Mr. Secretary, this is unexpected." Forrester extended his hand. "I've been following your program with great interest, Ms. Carter. What you're building here could revolutionize how we approach operator training and post-service transition." "That's the goal," Mara agreed cautiously, wondering why a cabinet secretary would take personal interest in their small program. "I'll be direct," Forrester continued. "The department is establishing a new division focused specifically on special operations personnel, their unique needs both during service and after. I'd like you to consider heading it." Mara stared at him. "Me? I've been an instructor for exactly half a day. And you've been living the problem we're trying to solve for the past decade. Your experience, both the triumph and the tragedy, gives you insights no one else has. With respect, Mr. Secretary, I'm still putting my own life back together. I'm not qualified to run a governmental division. 6 months ago, you were in prison. Now you're leading our most advanced marksmanship program. Qualifications evolve, Mara." Ethan touched his sister's arm. "They're right, you know. Who better to prevent others from falling through the cracks than someone who knows exactly where those cracks are?" Mara looked down at her prison tattoo, then back at the secretary. "I'll need time to think about it." "Of course," Forrester nodded, "but don't think too long. The problems we're addressing aren't waiting for bureaucracy to catch up." After they departed, Ethan studied his sister's troubled expression. "What's really bothering you about this offer?" Mara sank back into her chair. "It's too much, too fast. 6 months ago, I was inmate number 24601, just trying to survive each day. Now they want me making policy decisions that will affect thousands of veterans. And you don't think you're ready." "I know I'm not ready. I'm still having nightmares, still fighting cravings sometimes, still learning how to exist in a world that suddenly sees me as valuable instead of disposable." Ethan leaned against the desk. "You know what I think? I think you're scared of succeeding. What? Your whole identity has been built around survival against impossible odds.
The impossible shots in Afghanistan, the battle with addiction, the years in prison. What happens when the odds start favoring you instead? When doors open instead of closing? Mara fell silent, his words striking uncomfortably close to the truth. It's easier to be the underdog, Ethan continued gently. There's less responsibility, less expectation. But sometimes the biggest act of courage isn't surviving the fall. It's learning how to rise again afterward. Before Mara could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. The trainees were returning from lunch break, their voices carrying through the open door. "Back to work," Mara said, grateful for the interruption. "We'll talk about this later." The afternoon session focused on shooting under stress conditions. Mara had designed a series of scenarios that mimicked combat environments: physical exertion followed by precision shooting, decision-making under time pressure, distinguishing between hostile and non-hostile targets. "The fundamentals matter," she explained, as the trainees rotated through the course. "But what separates the good from the great isn't just technique, it's mental resilience. The ability to make the right decision when everything inside you is screaming for flight or fight." As the day progressed, Mara found herself sharing more than just marksmanship principles. She talked about her own experiences, not just the legendary shots in Afghanistan, but the darker moments that followed. The injury that led to painkillers, the addiction that led to desperation, the arrests that led to prison. "The system has gaps," she told them candidly. "Gaps that swallowed me whole for nearly a decade. Part of your training here isn't just about being elite operators. It's about recognizing the warning signs in yourselves and your teammates, about knowing when to reach for help instead of reaching for a bottle or a pill." By the final exercise, even the most hardened operators were listening with rapt attention. It wasn't just her shooting skills that commanded their respect now. It was her raw honesty about the fall that had followed her greatest triumph. After dismissing the class, Mara remained at the range, methodically cleaning her rifle as the sun began to set. The repetitive motion was meditative, allowing her thoughts to settle after the intensity of the day. "You're a natural teacher," came a familiar voice. Mara looked up to find Miguel Rodriguez approaching. Since the beach house reunion, he'd become a regular visitor to the facility, occasionally guest instructing specialized courses. "I'm figuring it out as I go," Mara replied modestly. Rodriguez settled onto the bench beside her. "Hayes told me about Forrester's offer. News travels fast. In our circles, at light speed." He watched her hands moving expertly over the rifle components. "So what's holding you back?" Mara set down the cleaning rod. "I spent years trying to numb my pain with chemicals, then years in prison just trying to survive each day. I'm not sure I know how to think bigger than that anymore, how to see past the immediate horizon to what could be." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "After I got clean, I had the same problem. Couldn't plan more than a day ahead. Couldn't envision a future that wasn't defined by my mistakes." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small token, a sobriety chip marking 10 years clean. "Know what changed?" "What?" "I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who might learn from it, everyone who might avoid my mistakes if I had the courage to share them." He handed her the chip. "Turn it over." On the back, someone had engraved a simple phrase: "From darkness, light." My sponsor gave me that. It reminded me that our darkest experiences often become our greatest sources of light for others, but only if we're brave enough to step into the light ourselves. Mara turned the chip over in her palm, feeling its weight. "I'm not sure I'm brave enough for what Forrester is asking." The woman who made those shots in Afghanistan?
who survived addiction and prison and came out still fighting? Rodriguez shook his head. I think you're plenty brave. I think you're just not used to fighting for something other than survival.
Among other things. She hesitated. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. After Operation Crosswind, after you came home, was it hard to reconcile who you were in that canyon with who you needed to be afterward? Reeves considered the question carefully. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, he finally admitted. Harder than surviving the ambush itself. Going from life-or-death decisions to mundane civilian concerns, it felt impossible at first. How did you bridge that gap? I didn't, for a long time, Reeves confessed. I compartmentalized, kept the combat experiences locked away, separate from everyday life. It worked, until it didn't. He looked at her directly. The breaking point came when my wife found me cleaning my service weapon at 3 in the morning. I couldn't even explain why. What changed? I started talking, started connecting those compartmentalized pieces instead of keeping them separate. Started recognizing that the man in that canyon and the man at his daughter's ballet recital weren't different people. They were both me, with different aspects of the same core identity. Mara nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The hero and the fallen. The decorated sniper and the prison inmate. They're all just fragments of who I am. Exactly, Reeves affirmed. And what Forrester is offering you isn't a position based on just one of those fragments. It's an opportunity to bring all of them together, to use every part of your experience to help others avoid the chasms you fell into. As the day's training session began, Mara found herself watching the trainees with new awareness. Each of them carried their own fragments, the warrior and the spouse, the operator and the parent, the hero and the human. The challenge wasn't in keeping these aspects separate, but in integrating them into a cohesive whole. During the lunch break, she made her decision. She found Admiral Hayes in her office, reviewing program metrics. I want to accept Secretary Forrester's offer, but I have conditions. Hayes looked up with interest. I'm listening. First, I want to continue teaching here part-time. The hands-on work with operators keeps me connected to the reality of what we're trying to address. Reasonable? What else? I want a team that includes former operators who've experienced the full spectrum, from combat excellence to post-service struggles. People who've been through addiction, homelessness, legal troubles, the ones society wrote off, like me. Hayes nodded slowly. That could face resistance from traditional bureaucracy. Then they can find someone else, Mara said firmly. I won't pretend to have all the answers, but I know this much. You can't address a problem effectively when you exclude the perspectives of those who've lived it firsthand. And your third condition? Mara hesitated. I want to establish a transition program specifically for female operators, women who served in combat roles, officially or unofficially. Their experiences and challenges are often overlooked in a system designed primarily for men. Hayes smiled. Secretary Forrester anticipated that request. He's already allocated funding for such a program, pending your acceptance of the position. That afternoon, as Mara guided her trainees through advanced shooting positions, she felt a clarity that had eluded her for years. The fragmented pieces of her identity, the legendary sniper, the fallen addict, the prison inmate, the redemption story, were finally aligning into a coherent whole. Precision isn't just about hitting the target. It's about understanding every variable that affects the shot. Wind direction, barometric pressure, bullet drop over distance. She paused, making eye contact with each trainee. The same principle applies to life after service. You have to account for all the variables. The adrenaline withdrawal, the search for purpose, the challenge of translating specialized skills into civilian contexts. One of the trainees, a hardened operator with multiple combat tours, raised his hand. With respect, ma'am, how do we prepare for variables we can't predict? Mara answered without hesitation.
By building resilience. Not the kind that means never breaking, the kind that means knowing how to put yourself back together when you do. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the prison tattoo. This isn't just ink. It's a reminder that falling doesn't mean staying down.
That redemption is possible, even from the darkest places. As the training day concluded, Mara found Ethan waiting at the range exit. "How'd they take the news?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Mara replied. "I'm keeping my teaching role here part-time while developing the new division with Forrester." Ethan grinned. "The best of both worlds." "Something like that," Mara agreed, "though it still feels surreal. A year ago, I was counting days in the cell. Now I'm helping shape policy that might have prevented me from ending up there in the first place." "Full circle," Ethan observed. "Not quite," Mara corrected. "A spiral, maybe. Coming back to similar ground, but at a different level." As they walked toward the parking lot, the setting sun cast long shadows across the training facility. In the distance, a new group of trainees was assembling for evening exercises. Faces full of determination, unaware of the invisible wounds many of them would carry long after their service ended. "You know what's strange?" Mara said, pausing to watch them. "I spent years trying to escape my past, the glory and the shame of it. But it turned out that embracing all of it was the only way forward." "Is that what you're going to teach them?" Ethan nodded toward the trainees. "Among other things," Mara smiled. "That and how to make impossible shots in thunderstorms." 1 month later, Mara stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing the inaugural conference of the Special Operations Veterans Transition Initiative. The audience included military leaders, healthcare professionals, policymakers, and, most importantly, veterans themselves. Men and women who had served in the most demanding roles and now faced the challenge of reintegrating into civilian life. "The distance between hero and forgotten is shorter than we like to admit," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know because I've traveled that distance myself, from making shots that saved lives to stealing prescription pads to feed an addiction, from receiving classified commendations to receiving prison sentences." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the prison tattoo that she now wore openly, a badge not of shame, but of survival. "This isn't the only mark my journey has left on me," she continued. "Some scars are visible, others run deeper. But I've learned that our wounds, physical, psychological, and spiritual, don't have to define us as broken. They can define us as human, as resilient, as capable of both falling and rising again." From the front row, Miguel Rodriguez nodded encouragement. Beside him sat Commander Reeves, Lieutenant Daniels, and the men whose lives she'd saved during Operation Crosswind. Ethan stood at the back of the room, pride evident in his posture. "The program we're launching today isn't about pretending the darkness doesn't exist. It's about providing light when that darkness feels overwhelming. It's about creating systems that recognize the complexity of the transition from warrior to civilian. It's about ensuring that the next generation of operators doesn't have to choose between asking for help and losing everything." As she concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not just for her words, but for what she represented: the possibility of redemption, of purpose found in the aftermath of loss, of strength forged through adversity. Later at the reception, Admiral Hayes approached with a small velvet box. "A small token," she said, handing it to Mara, "from those of us who believed in you even when the system didn't." Inside lay a custom-designed insignia, a recreation of her original Echo 3 designation, but with a new element, 3 ascending waves, reminiscent of her prison tattoo, symbolizing rising from the depths. "For your new uniform," Hayes explained, "a reminder of where you've been and how far you've come." Mara traced the design with her finger, emotions welling. "Thank you," she managed, "for seeing value in all of me, not just the heroic parts." "The heroic parts were impressive," Hayes acknowledged, "but it's the human parts, the struggle, the fall, the rising again, that will save lives in a different way now."
As the evening wound down, Mara found herself on the balcony of the venue, gazing at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. Ethan joined her, leaning against the railing. Pretty surreal, huh? From prison jumpsuits to policy conferences in less than a year.
Mara smiled. Life doesn't move in straight lines. No, Ethan agreed. Sometimes it takes impossible shots and thunderstorms. They stood in comfortable silence, the distant sounds of the reception washing over them. Mara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the perfect shots that had saved lives, the imperfect choices that had nearly destroyed her own, the unexpected second chance that had allowed her to transform both experiences into something meaningful. The prison tattoo on her arm would always remain, a permanent reminder of her darkest days. But now it sat alongside the new insignia, the official recognition of her service, the tangible symbol of her redemption. Different fragments of the same whole, telling a story not just of falling, but of the courage to rise again. "Ready to go back in?" Ethan asked. Mara nodded, ready for whatever comes next. As she turned to rejoin the gathering, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors. Not just the woman she had been, or the woman she was now, but all the versions between. The trained killer, the broken addict, the prison inmate, the instructor, the advocate. Each one a necessary chapter in a story still being written. The prison tattoo that had once marked her as an outcast now served as a beacon for others navigating their own darkness. Proof that even the deepest fall could become the foundation for an extraordinary rise. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.